We are inundated with information about renewable energy right now, and I live in Southern California as well. Chad actually is in Texas, so
Both sides.
both sides. And but constantly, this is the conversation. We hear things about the Green New Deal and how so many of these technologies are the answer to every problem that we have. But one of the realities, I think, and this is something you have talked about, is that the technology does not support what we're trying to do with some of these so-called renewable energies. Can you give us an overview of where these technologies are and maybe where they're not is a more appropriate way to put that?
Sure. Yeah. So, for my research and what I've put together, I mean, first thing we have to understand is that we're dealing with like real laws, like natural boundaries that are
Right.
set. So we have natural boundaries that are set by laws of gravity, inertia, friction, mass, and thermodynamics. So when we start talking about getting energy from solar or from wind, we have those constraints that those are natural laws.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, oh, technology is just going to improve it and we can get past natural laws. At the end of the day, I like to say that we can ignore reality, but we cannot escape the outcome of reality, right? And so what we've seen is that technology has come a really long way. So for example, wind power technology has had massive improvements. As a matter of fact, we've seen 10 times gains. We've also seen the same in solar, but how much more gains are possible? So for example, solar technology is constrained by the physics for silicon photovoltaic, that's the PV cells. And there's something called the Shockley-Queisser limit. And it's a maximum conversion of 34% of photons into electrons. So getting a little bit scientific, but we have to convert the photons. So it's 34% conversion of photons into electrons. The best commercial PV technology today is already exceeding 26%. So 34% is the ceiling. We're already at 26%. So we've made massive improvement,
Yeah.
but we don't have that much more to go. So can they get more efficient? Yes, they can. But how much more is the question? And the answer is not that much more. We can also look at wind the same way. Again, we have the physics boundary for wind turbines. It's called the Betz limit. It's a maximum capture of 60% of kinetic energy in the moving air. And today, commercial turbines already exceed 40%.
Wow.
So to go from 10% to 40% was a big move, but we don't have that much move left. So that's kind of some of the constraints that we have with those two types of technologies.
You say you're not an engineer. You sure sound like an engineer. Those were a lot of engineer words.
Yeah, just research.
Yeah, very good.
So, I mean, so really, we're just not there yet, and we don't know. I mean, there's no evidence that we ever will be there, but yet there's this agenda to get to renewables. By implementing this while we're not there, what is there a global impact? Is there environmental impact? What are the unintended consequences for switching over to these technologies too soon?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I'll answer them. I'd like to throw out just a couple more stats that I have prepared here, just so we know. So wind and solar sound great, of course. We understand that we're getting close to where the peak is. I do believe that they're going to improve. We still have room to improve. So maybe we should wait to go into full scale development until the technology is even better, right? Why should we go spend everything and build it all out right now when technology is not there? So maybe we should continue to develop technology another decade or two before we go full scale. That being said, one thing that also we need to keep in mind is that the sun's not out all the time.
Right.
The wind doesn't blow all the time. Right. So how do we account for that, right? Energy, natural energy, whether it's gas or oil or nuclear, is 24/7, and we need energy 24/7. So what happens when we don't have that? Well, we have to store the energy somehow. And so how do we store them? Well, we store them in batteries. Now, everybody's familiar with Tesla. They're the big stock market darling. They've built what's called the Gigafactory, which is the world's largest battery factory. And it would require them 1,000 years of production to make enough batteries for just 2 days worth of U.S. electricity demand.
Wow.
So it would take them, the biggest battery factory we have in the world,
wow.
take them 1,000 years
wow.
to store energy for 2 days. In the meanwhile, again, back to trade-offs, there's 50 to 100 pounds of materials are mined, moved, and processed for every pound of battery produced. And these batteries are like 1,000 pounds. So again, the more constraints that we have, all right, and we have to understand the trade-offs that are there. So for example, making this stuff is not clean by any means. We have to use carbon in order to make it. And when we compare it, again, everything has trade-offs. So if we spent $1 million on utility scale wind turbines and solar panels, over 30 years of it would take 30 years of operation to produce 50 million kilowatt hours. That same $1 million spent on natural gas over the same 30 years would produce 300 million kilowatt hours. So from 50 to 300 million. So it's not just about the energy, it's also about the money. And if we want to get into the economic side of this, right now, the U.S. budget the deficit is about the same as the income. So we have about $3.5 trillion of income. Our deficit is about $3.5 trillion. So where do we get the money to spend into this? And shouldn't we be spending our money as efficiently as possible? So that's another question. But anyway, Chad, you had asked, I'm sorry, what was the question that you'd asked? Why are these policies in place?
I mean, and clearly you illustrated so greatly that we're premature. We should be looking at development instead of implementation at this point, but yet we're seeing the implementation. So what's the consequences? What's the unintended consequences of implementing so soon? Obviously.
Well, I mean, the unintended consequences, there's many. Obviously, this gets a little bit I think it should get into a little bit of more of an economic debate. And so I believe that all the money printing that we've had, the inflation, is the cause of almost every problem that we have. And so we need to get back into a budget living on a sound money. So when we go and spend, whatever the Green New Deal, or now they call it the Biden deal, they're proposing to spend anywhere from $30 trillion to $100 trillion. Well, where does that money come from?
Right.
The money we don't have.
And so what are the unintended consequences of printing 30 to 100 trillion dollars? That's massive. We're at 26 trillion, whatever, 28 trillion dollars of debt right now. And all that debt creation has caused these booms and busts and caused these wealth transfers and caused this inequality, this wealth income gap, all these things. Imagine how exaggerated that gets if we go print another 30 to 100 trillion over the next, 5-10 years. So that's a massive amount of unintended consequences right there.
To implement a technology that doesn't exist.
To implement a technology that isn't capable right now, and it would, but again, right, like how big of a project, how much time, how much resources do we want to dedicate towards that?
Yeah.
So when you consider all of that, is there a path forward? In California, we kind of go under the, we're going to mandate the transition, and it will happen by this date. I'm not sure that's the path forward. But as we look to the future, 40, 50, 100 years down the road, is there a moderate approach to this, or is it an all or nothing approach? How do we move forward with some of these technologies?
Well, they're definitely a very nuanced argument. And so what I would say, first of all, is what we see is that we are having policy driven by politicians and bankers,
right?
But they're not the experts that know about running oil or natural gas or solar. So it's cool for Biden or Bernie Sanders was pushing it originally, like, we're going to go all renewable. But what does he know about that?
Right.
And so we've seen this play out. For example, we can just look at Venezuela. Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the world not that long ago. They're one of the most natural resource rich countries in the entire world. I believe they have more oil than Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
But yet what happened is they nationalized that. So they had all these oil companies there that were producing oil and things were great.
Yep.
But they decided, hey, we're going to take over. We're going to nationalize the oil industry. And they put a bunch of cronies to take over. But what do they know about running oil companies?
Sure.
And guess what happens today? They can't even get the oil out of the ground because they don't know anything about it. And so that's the problem of when you take, private industry who specializes and focuses on this and knows how to run it, and then you just put bureaucrats in charge.
Right.
And so that is definitely a big unintended consequence. Now, and so this is a nuanced argument, and we can go into lots of arguments about why do we even think carbon is so bad in the first place? And is it really as bad as people think it is? And is it really something that we should be focusing on? I mean, those are definitely conversations that we could have. But just without even going into that rabbit hole, what we can easily say is, well, if we think technology is all that and it can solve everything, and we think that technology could potentially even get past these laws of nature, which I don't think it can, wouldn't we also say that technology could probably make natural gas cleaner?
Sure.
Couldn't technology make getting oil out of the ground cleaner? So we could easily make progress there, which might be a better argument than trying to think that technology can break the laws of nature.